Well Rooted is brought to you by Gerard and Associates CPAs. With locations throughout Los Angeles, Gerard and Associates has been guiding entrepreneurs and creatives towards realizing their dreams for over 20 years. Discover how they can support your vision at gerardcpa.com. Hey, it's Haneen, and I'm back with another episode of Well Rooted. Today, my guest is Shahed Khaddash. Shahed is a director, producer. She's worked with some of the biggest brands, including OLAY, Lexus. She's been featured in Elle Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, and she's been working on some really cool projects for the community. Please welcome Shahed Khaddash onto Well Rooted. I am here with another episode of Well Rooted, and today I'm joined by Shahed Khaddash. You are a director, you are a storyteller, producer. Walk us through a little bit of what your projects so far have been and sort of the role that you play in that.
Yeah, so I primarily work as a commercial and branded director and producer. But I've taken a little bit of a break this summer from that. I came over to LA to work as a producer's assistant for two executive producers on an HBO show.
Oh, cool.
So I thought that would be like a great place to learn more about like directing, producing on like a larger scale.
Yeah,
And I'm also in post production on a short Palestinian docu-series that I filmed and directed in June.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. And so that one you just wrapped is the docuseries?
We
Or you're
actually before I got here, we wrapped the docu-series, so we're in
okay.
like the post process for that. And then also the HBO show we finished end of September, like the primary principal photography.
That's
Yeah.
exciting. And do you feel like, you are a Palestinian
Mhm.
creator. You're a Palestinian artist. You've always been. But do you feel like maybe the events of the past year, this live stream genocide that we are now witnessing, has it impacted how you envision your storytelling to take shape for the future?
Yeah, it definitely has, but I will say like Palestine is one of the reasons I've got into filmmaking.
Hmm.
I remember when I was younger, I was in high school, I was in a photography class, and that's something I really loved, and it's like the first kind of like step into kind of like creative eye.
Hmm.
And I was when I was thinking like what am I going to be when I grow up? I remember well I like photography and I like politics, but I never envisioned a Palestinian politician in America. And of course we have that now. But at that time it was just I'm like I didn't really see how I could do that or you like speak about Palestine in like Congress or something like that. But I'm like something that does move people and something that allows people maybe they don't change their mind at first, but like opens their perspective is storytelling. So that's how I kind of decided I want to be a director. I want to like write. I would love one day to be able to tell like my grandma's story on screen. And that's kind of how I got into filmmaking. I would say the last year probably just like reset me because like once you start working, you get I guess you get so interested in different topics and you
Hmm.
kind of like, okay, I'm on this track, I'm on this track. I don't want to just be like a Palestinian filmmaker. I don't want to only be known by like
Right.
for Palestinian like work. But then when this happened, I'm like, this is actually the most important thing in my life. And like when I got to actually direct the docu series, it felt like purposeful and like fulfilling where I love the other work that I do, but you don't get that same, I guess, value out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. But I also think it's worth mentioning that the other work that you've done before, even though it doesn't necessarily pertain directly to Palestine, that is the Palestinian artist who's behind that work, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to point out right now because we're constantly dehumanized and made to look as if we don't contribute to society or that we're not a part of mainstream society. But to say like I actually am, the one who's creating these ads and I'm the one that's helping showcase these brands and the way that you're consuming them and taking them in. Like I'm behind that. And that was the vision of a Palestinian director or a Palestinian producer.
Mhm.
So I think that's really important to point out as well. Do you feel like you carry that responsibility with you whenever you go to different projects, or is that something that you feel you need to represent, and especially in the industry that you work in?
In the commercial world, I don't feel like that
Hmm.
pressure, but I do. Like I know as someone with a different background than everyone else, I do see things a little differently and it actually helps me. So like
Mhm.
I view things differently because I grew up with like sometimes different we grew up with like similar American culture, but I also have like influencers from like the Middle East, influences from like different places that I visited. So it helps me in that aspect. And being a minority when I'm going to tell different stories, I'm also consciously aware of like trying to put diversity in the work that I'm doing
Mhm.
and making sure like, okay, this brand asks they want diversity in this like 30-second spot that they're doing. They want to highlight this activist. I'm like, okay, well, you have to give her the voice and the space to tell the story that she wants to tell. So that's kind of like where I bring in like my background because I know what it's like to be kind of like silenced or like see ads, see like videos that you're not represented in. So I guess that's how I enter. I don't know if that's like a good way of explaining it, but
No,
that's how I
but
bring
I
it
mean, I
in.
get what you're saying, and that's a really good point because oftentimes you can tell from looking at an ad or looking at a magazine or whatever it is that there are no maybe people of color in the room.
Hmm.
There's no diversity in the room. There's no one like you to be there and point out, or, like, oh, we need someone from a different background, and we need to let them have that time to speak. So that's really important, and I feel like that's something that we would notice that,
Hmm.
like you said, the other people just would not even be keen to at all.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's also like, okay, we want to, if it's like a room just maybe like of white people, there's sometimes we're like, oh, let's say this. I'm like, well, that doesn't actually fit with what, or that's maybe insensitive, or there's maybe more genuine way of like telling the story that you want to tell.
you're
So
like,
it's
that's
just
not
like,
appropriate. Don't say that.
yeah.
Please don't say that.
Yeah, exactly. I was lucky because I had the last place I was working at when I was like directing, my boss was very like also in tune with these types of topics and trying to bring in as much diverse like voices as he could.
That's great. Well, that's good to hear. At least we're moving in the right direction in some
Yeah.
cases. I always think back to Mindy Kaling. I think she did an amazing job and still does an amazing job for not only casting great like South Asian actresses,
Hmm.
but just creating roles that really exemplify South Asian culture just in mainstream comedy series and in television. Uh, do you find like is that the type of thing that you see yourself doing in the future? Not necessarily Mindy Kaling type, but obviously your version of what is your version of that for the future?
I guess there's still a lot of stories that I want to tell. Like I want to continue in like the commercial and branded field, but I do want to eventually like be able to do my own films and television shows. I do have those like films that I want to do. Like I do want to tell my grandma's story about Palestine and just like also like how I grew up and things like that. And just naturally, just like normal stories, like you said, like it's just regular stories of someone growing up,
Mhm.
but they look a little different and the culture's a little different. And it's not like me trying to work it in. It's just like,
That's what it is.
yeah.
Yeah, that's your reality and the reality of so many, and those
Hmm.
stories need to be told. What is your process? So, do you have like a process before you're on set? Is there like a preparation process that you have to get organized or to sort of prepare for the day ahead?
Yeah.
What
Um,
does that look like?
I'm just gonna get a little bit of water
Yeah, yeah, go
just before,
ahead.
because I have like coughing a little bit.
I think my first or second episode,
Yeah.
I was just clearing my throat so much. And then my stomach started growling. And
Oh
then I'm
no.
like, what is this mic picking up? Because
Yeah.
if it's picking up the stomach and the, the throat clearing, we're not in a great spot.
Yeah, I had like a protein bar before, so I just like feel it.
You're like, it's still, those are very chalky.
Hmm. It's the worst during like Ramadan, like when you're
Yeah.
in a meeting with everyone and then it's like so quiet and then your like stomach growls.
Yeah. And your mouth is also dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said like what's the process before?
Hmm.
So if I was like say like directing like a Brandon spot, there's usually so much that happens before we actually get to set. So one of the first things is like when a project gets awarded or assigned to me, I start like the creative phase. And what that is like I look over the brand book, what the campaign is for like the product that we're highlighting, what we're doing. Are we like trying to spread brand awareness? Do we want more clicks to the website? Where the ad's living? And then I think about like what the magazine is. So like sometimes we had like a project with Olay and they wanted a video to live on Harper's Bazaar. So it's kind of like marrying those two brands, thinking about what the story we could tell is. So they wanted to do something with one of our fashion editors. So they wanted to do beauty mixed with fashion. So what I would do in that case is like basically study all the materials there are because you can't come up with idea out of thin air. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm not creative. I can't think of anything." I'm like,
Yeah. Well, that's what I think, right? That's
"Yeah."
why I'm like, wait, how do you come up with this?
Yeah, so that's I remember when I first started, I'm like, "Oh no, like I'm not creative. There's like I can't think of an idea." And I'm like, "Oh, like let me look at the brand book that they sent." A lot of people just like don't look at
So,
that.
what is a brand book for those of us that don't have experience with that?
Yeah, so it will be like sometimes it's like the brand guidelines. So every brand that you work with
Hmm.
is gonna have like almost their Bible. Like this is the font we use. This is our
Mm.
messaging. This is our audience. This is how our audience like thinks. This is how they shop. And
So
sometimes
they do their research.
yeah, and it's like so interesting seeing like different kind of brands too. Like you'll have your technology and your beauty and like pharma and how they like speak to their customers. And a lot of people kind of like maybe ignore the brand book, but I'm like, I think it's really important just like to look at, read about what their campaign is and what the
Hmm.
most recent videos they done are. Because maybe it's like just one thing, maybe it's just like one line or image from all this that like
Right.
gets you thinking, and then you kind of like take that, marry it with where is it going to live, what are you trying to achieve, and I feel like then you kind of start to assemble like, okay, this is the story I want to tell, and then what I'll do is create a mood board. So I'll watch different videos, take stills of like the images that I kind of like how I'm picturing the look and feel of the video. I'll put it all into a mood board. I'll add like product photography of like what we're actually trying to highlight. And then I'll put that into a creative deck. They'll also have like story beats, talent options that our talent team will pull, and then a few other things. But that's basically just to give the client like, hey, this is the video we're thinking of doing. This is the story, and this is what it's gonna look like. So sometimes you'll be like, I want a really modern beauty look, like very crisp and clean. Other
Hmm.
times you're like, I'd like it to be saturated, a little grainy, like more like that film aspect to it. And then once they approve that, you kind of get the ball rolling. So then you start pre production, which is meeting with your producer and production manager and basically saying, like, this is the DP I want, which is like your camera person. This is who I want for wardrobe. This is who I want for makeup. And then they'll loop you into the conversations. And then all of you just start sharing ideas and references. They'll send over boards, and then you present that again to client now with like a finished like script, and like everything's more kind of like hard lined. So once they approve that, then you go to set. I know that was like very
All that
long.
before set.
Yeah.
Wow. How long is that entire process?
So depend on like what the video is. We kind of had a pretty quick turnaround, so that would be like 8 weeks.
Hmm.
Sometimes it'd be shorter, like 6 to 4, if it's like really rush timeline.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow. I had no idea it took so long to create an ad campaign for one product or
yeah.
one
I mean,
brand.
that is technically like I think on the shorter. It's just getting shorter and shorter. I think if you're doing like television commercials, you might have like more time.
Okay. So that's maybe more editorial.
Hmm.
Okay. And it sounds like it's a very collaborative environment. Would you say that, or would you say like maybe the connections and the relationships you form in that industry are equally or even more important than the skill, talent, and experience? Or is it sort of like you need both?
I think you need both.
Okay.
You definitely need like the skills and experience, but again, like if you're stepping on set for the first time, like say you've worked on like smaller shoots where you're doing everything, it is kind of almost like a relief. You're getting on set with like a full crew. You have like a DP, he has his whole like camera team, lighting team. You have like all these talented people working behind you where you feel like, okay, if one thing doesn't go right, it's still gonna look really great. And I think the important thing with like branded and commercial work, it's like always has to be visually engaging.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like clients like want their products to look perfect. And you have like a team around you that's like also always watching the monitor. So if there's something like if there's like a hair on
Oh,
like
wow.
the
Every
table,
detail.
yes, someone's gonna notice it. We're gonna like get it cleaned up. But I think like that is like kind of like the relief, but you also like need to bring your skills to set. And then as you work more and more, you'll find the people that you want to work with and you'll start to build like nice relationships where you have like a shorthand on set.
How has that prepared you going into working on a docuseries for HBO and the other series that you mentioned earlier, the Palestinian
Yeah.
series? How has that type of work prepared you for your role in those jobs and those projects?
Well, so the docu-series is the Palestinian film,
Okay.
the Palestinian docu-series, and then so HBO, the HBO show, unfortunately, I can't say like what.
Oh
I can't say
man.
like the what the show is or like exact
Do you know
details.
when it will be out for us to
Um,
watch or
yeah,
not
it'll
yet?
be out in the spring.
Next spring.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there'll be more eventually they'll announce what it is, I think
Okay,
in a few
great.
months. But yeah, I guess like going into my own like personal project, which is the Palestinian docu series, I kind of created initially when like this nonprofit asked me to do it and they basically were like, this is just like a small thing. We want like interviews, we like the work that you do. And I knew someone that like worked at I went to college with a person who works at the nonprofit. So when she told me the story, I'm like, wow, these are really important stories to tell.
Mhm.
And initially, I was like, just gonna do it all myself, which I've done before. Like, I have my own camera, I was like, shoot it, direct it, do the whole thing. And then I'm like, let's see who would be interested. We don't really have a budget. It's like barely a budget. Let me just like put on my story, like who's interested in like working in this. And then surprisingly, so many people like reached out, which was nice to see. Like people care about the cause, but
Mhm.
it's also just like I've built the relationships and I've built like a look and feel with like my work that people also want to be a part of that. So that kind of gave me confidence going into it. And I just like loved having other talented people around me putting their input into the work. And then also, um, just like if you have like a question or like, oh, how else can we do this in like a different way? You have
Mhm.
people that you can trust. And then for the HBO show, I think it's kind of like having the confidence to go in the room with your like opinions and just it's kind of different because it's like almost like a lower role, right? Because I'm like in a almost like a big, I guess a big person. What is that saying?
You're a smaller fish in a bigger bowl
Yeah,
instead of you in your previous jobs you were like the big fish in
yeah.
the bowl, right?
So yeah, so it's like kind of like that change of those positions, but I think it's just like knowing that your skill sets, like if you could do XYZ, you could just transfer it to like all these other things. Because like as a producer's assistant, you're essentially doing all the tasks that your executive producers like don't have time to do for the day because they have so much going on. So, and I was also doing research for them as well. So you have to be able to take on those tasks. Sometimes
Mhm.
they're really small tasks, sometimes they're very big tasks, and it's going to happen like anytime during the day, and you might get 5 or 10 at once, and you have to like decide what the priority is and just get it done.
Prioritize, yeah.
Yeah, and you just have to get it done. It's not like you're going to go ask 100 people, oh, how should I do this? Like, no.
Oh, you can't do that. I would be so bad at that job.
I mean, you can definitely ask questions, and I think you should ask questions when you have them, but it's
Mhm.
also try to figure it out first, I would
Of
say.
course, yeah. And you obviously have proven yourself worthy of
Mm,
figuring that out on your own. Otherwise, you wouldn't even be there, right? Like on
yeah.
that set. Yeah, I feel like sometimes there's so much allure with a movie set or a film set or even any sort of set because we, like as an audience, don't know the ins and outs of it. So it's basically whatever we see depicted on film, on TV, whatever's shown, like BTS, like on social. And there's just so much that we don't see that goes into a finished product. So, like, learning about all of this from you is very wild, like, to be honest, because we don't understand, we don't know all the work that goes into it sometimes.
Yeah.
Even like executive producer, I'm like, is that just like a title? Like, what are you doing? Like, what is that role? So the director is basically the person that's managing like the shots. Is that it? Or managing the actors and the set and making the
Yeah.
final decisions on
So
everything, or is that the producer?
so it's kind of so everyone always people tend to say like TV is the producer's world, film is the director's
Mm,
world. But the show that I can't say too much about it, but the show that I worked on is like very unique in its own way. And the director is also producer, actor, writer. So he's kind of like
wow.
does everything. And yeah, I had the same idea as like executive producers. I'm like, they're the ones that are funding the movie or
Exactly.
film
Yeah.
or and again, like it'll be different in different aspects. We have executive producer in a commercial, on a TV show, on a film. They're all gonna do different things, and depending what the show is, they're gonna do different things. So I also was like excited to work on this because I also wanted to see like how everything came together. So our director was, yes, he'd basically be. I guess I'm trying to think of the simplest way to explain it. So the director really is when they're on set, they're super focused on working with the talent,
Mm,
which is like our cast or like real people, and the DP, which is the director of photography, the camera person. So like he's mainly focused on like getting the performances or getting the story that he wants to tell, and then making sure that all the cameramen are getting exactly like the vision and the look of everything. Of course, he was also involved in writing and a lot of other things. And then the executive producers that I worked for were like creative executive producers. One was an executive producer and writer. So it's hard to explain. They literally do everything. Like everything is if the director is like wrote this whole episode and it has like 100 different elements in it, the producers have to be like, okay, well, how do we get not that this happened, how do we get an elephant on set? How do we get this
mm.
like how are we gonna get these shots of like a car chase? How they have to figure it
They
all
figured
out.
that part out.
Yeah.
Okay, the hard stuff.
Yeah, and they also have creative input as well, but they have to figure out like how does this all come together and then if something's not working on set or something has to change, they work with the director to make it to think of like solutions and they really have to like support the director throughout the process.
So is there a hierarchy, or are they both kind of on equal playing fields?
I would say like the director is like higher,
Okay.
but again, like this was like kind of like a unique show, or other times I would say maybe in TV, the producers usually on TV, the producers are like always on set
Mm.
and like say like a show, like a sitcom show, you would have different director. You may have a different director for every episode.
Yeah, yeah, because we see that a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
directed by so and so, and
Yeah.
it's always some. And I'm always looking for an Arab name. I'm like, okay, who's directing today?
Yeah. Which
Yeah,
actually Rami Youssef directed some of The Bear, I think, on the second
yeah,
season, which
yeah.
was
That's right.
nice to see.
It is really nice to see, and I hope we see more of that.
Yeah.
How do you see Palestinian and Arab representation um, in the industry going forward? Do you see more representation happening? Is it going to happen, or from what you see,
Mhm.
is it going to happen at like a very fast, rapid level, or are we going to have to like ease our way into this? Like,
Yeah.
should we be going out there and trying to get our films made and our shows made right now?
Yeah. Well, it was really nice. It's like I just went to the Arab Film Festival in San Francisco. And so that since I've been here, I've been to like some small like Arab like film events. And I will say, like, I think it's kind of like a slow progression in a sense, but what's nice to see is like having these like super creative people like Rami Youssef or Mo Amer that like direct and write and are like multifaceted, creating their own shows and like they're creating a space for this work. They're showing like, hey,
Hmm.
there's an audience that wants to see these stories. And what's nice is it's not just stories about us suffering. They're also like funny stories, human stories. So I think it's just about maybe like time and just we just have to make like more work and show that like we have an audience for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when we have people like Mohammed
Mhm.
and Rami Youssef who are already creating those spaces, they, give opportunity to other Palestinians and other Arabs and other, people of the MENA background to sort of step in and
Mhm.
also play a role in those projects, which is really great. And it's kind of the only way we can really make it, up to where we need to be in order to have our stories told. Um, I want to go back a little bit and
Okay.
talk about your roots. And if you don't mind sharing like a little bit about your background and how you grew up, and I think that'll give us more insight of, what made you a storyteller.
Yeah, so I was born in Doha, Qatar to Palestinians. But they actually I have two older brothers and an older sister. So they all kind of like grew up in Qatar, but my family decided to move to New Jersey when I was just like 2 months.
You're like,
So
oh
it's kind
man.
of so it's kind of just like born there, and then like for the most part I grew up in America, but every summer we'd go back and visit my mom's family in Qatar, and then my dad's family we would try to visit as much as we could when we were younger in Palestine. So on my mom's side, her family is from Safed, which is like in northern Palestine, which is
Mhm.
now occupied. And in 1948, they actually, I guess everyone kind of knows the story, but my grandma's family heard about what happened in Deir Yassin, which was not too far from them, and they were worried that it was going to get closer to their village. So they decided, like, let us just pack our things for the day, go to a village nearby, just to make sure it's like safe, and we might come back in a day or two. So
Mhm.
they actually had cooked food ready to go. They took their food, they put it in the fridge, they put some things in the oven, they took their gold and everything and put it in like the floorboards and different cupboards. They were expecting to go back.
Mhm.
And as they made the journey to the next village, it was actually really difficult. So they did everything on foot. People got lost in the way. There was like children that got lost. And then when they finally made it, there was a lot of British soldiers that were actually waiting in this village. So a lot of people thought the British had left at this point, but they didn't. I actually spoke to a lot of like other family friends who were from Suffolk as well or around, who had a similar story. But there was basically British like trucks, and they're like, we're going to take you somewhere safe. So they went in the trucks at night. They dropped them off. They're like, here you
Sounds
go.
awfully familiar, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, here you go. Like, this is, and there was just like a random street at night. And my grandma's brother had studied abroad in Lebanon. So he recognized the street signs, and they were
Mm.
in Lebanon. So there was just like a random,
That is
yeah.
insane. And like you can't even comprehend that.
No.
Yeah.
And they came from a very, like kind of like esteemed, like rich family. They were used to like a certain lifestyle, I'd say. And they just went from that to like living on the street, like in a night, basically. Um, but the Lebanese people, like it got broadcasted on the news what happened. The Lebanese people opened up their homes and basically opened up homes for people to stay, and they just became refugees. Um, my grandmother, like she was like an artist. She also helped in the women's like back in the day, like women would start to train like first aid
Mm.
for like the men that the go fight against the occupying power. So she would go and like help them, then come back home. So when she was in Lebanon, she started teaching art. Even though she was like a refugee, she like started teaching art to students and going on field trips. Eventually, they became refugees in different countries, but they ended up in Qatar. They were able to find jobs and like make a life
Mm.
there. And then my dad's side is like I would say they would say like Falahi. They're from Beit Bala. They were farmers and they were displaced into other areas of Palestine. So now
Mm.
they're in Ramallah and like the Jalazon.
Okay. Do you
Yeah,
still have family there today?
yeah. And the my dad's side in the West Bank.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of the original question. That was like my long-winded
No, this is all
background.
great. Like I really wanted to hear about your roots
Hmm.
and I love that you share that story about your grandmother.
I don't think like obviously like no one deserves to be displaced, like no matter what their background or
Right.
anything like that is. I mention it because it's I think people view us like they view like middle people from the Middle East, people from North Africa, like Arabs in general, as like s- people like below them, or people have always been through trauma, people have always lived kind of like this rough lifestyle. It's like no, as you mentioned, like Lebanon is the place like even like Americans would go to go party and
Mm-hmm.
like have fun. There's so much culture and history, and there's
What's
so much
that? Sorry,
different.
what's that joke? David Guetta is always in Beirut.
Yeah.
He's always playing in Beirut somewhere.
Yeah, and it's just like we have like a life and culture and history, and it's just like crazy like in one night that can change. And I think like we're seeing that. We've seen it all year in Palestine, and it's like crazy to see the photos of Lebanon and like not be able to tell, is this Gaza or is this like Beirut?
Exactly. You can't even tell them apart at this
No.
point, and you should be able to tell them apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because each one is culturally rich and diverse in its own way, and that's being erased like at this very moment, which is horrific,
Mm-hmm.
as we watch. So it's important that stories like the ones that you create and will continue to create and other directors and writers and producers will continue to create, it's important that those stories continue to be told and amplified, because we need to continue to share those and to kind of reaffirm our existence and place in this world, and make sure that those people's, that their lives weren't torn apart in vain. Like, something
Mm-hmm.
needs to live on. The stories need to live on no matter what. And I'm really glad that, I mean, I love that you do all kinds of work, and I hope you continue to do that, because that's who you are. You grew up here.
Yeah.
But the fact that you feel called now to sort of pivot into that direction for the time being is
Mm-hmm.
really inspiring. And I hope it inspires other storytellers as well. Is that something, do you feel like this need to sort of be like, I think we kind of spoke about it a little before,
Yeah.
but like to be more involved in the community and to sort of seek out those other creatives and the other artists within the community?
Yeah, well, it just like as I said, like the things that we write about are just like extensions of ourselves. So like it might be my Palestinian side, it might be more of my American side. And then a lot of times when you're like in spaces 24/7 where you're just talking about like a show or just
Mm,
like talking about an ad and like there's no awareness of like what's going on around you, or you
mm-hmm,
feel like maybe there's no like care about what's going on around you. Um you kind of you start to feel dehumanized, so it's like you want to seek out those environments where you have people that like value the same things as you.
mm-hmm.
And I think coming out here, it's like because I went to the between in February, I think it was, I went to the Between
Mm,
East
yeah.
event and I saw, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of Arab creators out
Mm-hmm.
here. But then when I came here, I'm like, wait, where are they? So I kind of like, um, yeah, I kind of like we're seeking them out and seeking out people that I'm like, are there Arab filmmakers? And I was able to find like like a few that when we've been out and like network. We actually did, um, me and my friend, we had like a little group of like I think it was like 6 girls. They were all like Arab filmmakers, and we just
Oh,
did
I
like a
love
trip to
that.
like Disneyland. We barely knew each other. We're just like, oh, let's
Let's go to
just go.
Disneyland.
Yeah, and like someone's like a writer, someone's like producing, someone's does this, and I'm like, this is really nice to feel like people you can share like the things you like and have in common,
Mm-hmm.
but also that like value and aware of like what's going on in the world, that you don't feel like because like one place that I was working on when I was making like commercials and branded, it's just like it's as if nothing was happening, and it kind of feels just to be in that environment all day, you kind of lose your mind. Where it's just like
I can imagine.
no one, like the most horrific thing would be happening, and then we get an email that, oh, we have to take, we're sorry, someone posted something that doesn't align with our values. We have to take it down. And that post was like something about Palestine. I'm just like,
Wow.
yeah, I'm like, this is like a deafening, like,
So that's the tone of the industry, I would
yeah.
assume, in general.
Well, that was more, that was when I was doing like commercial and like branded work.
Was that about you?
No, it was about
Oh,
someone else. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But do you feel like you have to sometimes, if you're working on a specific project, just sort of tone it down for that moment? Or, I mean, how does that? I wouldn't blame
Yeah.
you either way, because I understand how it works, but I'm just wondering, have you ever been made to feel like you can't be open and share the things you want to
Yeah.
share?
I'm trying to think as how this will be like, posted, but basically, like I was working somewhere that was more full time,
Mm,
and they did one time send out like this mass email to like the whole company saying like, hey, like we like a social media policy. They didn't say it was about Palestine, but everyone knew what
mm,
it was because someone got called out for like a Palestinian post. Um, but of course, like no one in the entire company like signed this like agreement because like it affected everybody because it said like you can't post something political. And then we had like the LGBT group in our company are like, hey, like people think our identity is political. So
exactly.
what is the line here? So I think it's like it also goes back to the whole thing. It's like when you stand up for Palestine, it's also standing up for like your rights. Cause like
Hmm.
slowly, like as we saw in like this company I was working on, eventually they were trying to like silence like a lot of people. I think my boss and people knew who I was and how I am before they hired me. I was posting before, so I was like still posting
Mm,
during. Obviously though, like if I'm doing like a campaign for something and we're posting, I don't want the campaign is the campaign. It's like should be what it is if I'm gonna be posting about that. So I won't like be posting my views or something at the same time, if that makes sense.
To not take away from the campaign that you're also working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand. And I think people in general with conscience like understand that as well,
Yeah.
or it should be understood by now. Um, yeah, that is, I mean, it's such an experience to grow up in this country, Palestinian,
Hmm.
right? Because you're sort of always in this tug of war of, this is me, this is my identity. But I'm also like live and enjoy the fruits of this country
Hmm.
that's bombing my home country. Like it's such a weird, dystopian feeling.
Yeah.
And so it's not really anything new for us, right? Because we've already grown up in it and you
Yeah.
kind of like learn how to manage it in your own way, just, as you become an adult and as you enter the career and world and,
Hmm.
and different industries. So it's kind of also a part of our identity is learning how to manage that
Hmm.
identity. And it's kind of like you said, like the LGBTQ community, like their identities are political. I was actually speaking to Lana Salah. She's a Palestinian-American stand-up comedian.
Oh, nice.
And she was saying that basically whenever she says she's Palestinian in a stand-up set, she's like, I've already divided the room, right? In some ways, because my existence is political. Like me just saying I'm Palestinian is
Yep.
political. That enough is, just saying that is enough to turn people off or
Hmm.
just to like allow their true biases to show. And so, it's a struggle. Like it's just a constant struggle because like you have to tell our stories and our stories will be told and our voices will be heard, but it's just the people that don't want to hear it will still mute it and act like nothing is happening right now in the world.
Yeah. I grew up in like a very white town. It's like it's gotten more diverse now, but I grew up in a very white town that like didn't everyone was like either like Italian or Irish, but they didn't know a lot about like the Middle East. They didn't know a lot about Palestine, and there was like there were racist teachers growing up, and I was a very shy kid. Like I barely spoke, but when it came to the topic of Palestine, I would just go up the class and like give a speech, which I think is like most Arab American like
Like I'm prepared for this.
experience. I'm like they must think it's really strange. It's like the only time I speak. But so I was like kind of like used to like talking about the experience and like talking to like my Jewish classmates and we would talk about like our families and things like that. When I got my first like job, I think that's when I was kind of like shocked because I went to NYU. I went to school in the city and like obviously it's like a liberal school, like everyone's sharing like certain like ideas. It's like I didn't feel like I had to hide anything. And then when I got a job and it was in the city, I was actually surprised by the reactions that I got from people. And you can tell like people treat you differently. And I had like racist experience at my first company. And it kind of made me rethink like how I should be presenting myself. Cause essentially you just want to be like working. You
Right.
don't want to like have extra friction at work. Sometimes like a job
Hmm.
is a job. And then like, especially in the beginning of the career, I'm just
Yeah, of
like, I'm
course.
not directing, I'm just trying to like pay for my rent. I'm trying to get to the next
Exactly.
job. But I think after that first experience, I felt like I kind of toned it down. But again, if something in Palestine happens, then I just like speak up or post
Yeah, you
again.
can't help it.
And it doesn't, it kind of does you a disservice to like shut down parts of yourself, like shut down, like if you're Palestinian or like I had a hard time because I'm like Muslim and I don't drink. And like a lot of the connections and things that happened at the bar, or like people might think you're being rude if you don't go out. I would eventually just like go out because like if you say no too many times, people
Yeah,
just think you're like don't want to hang out with
I
them.
have a
Like
Diet Coke.
like okay, I'll come for like
Yeah.
an hour before everyone gets really drunk. Um but what I noticed is like because I was like in the beginning of my career, I was like after that experience when I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to share these parts of myself. Um, it actually does you a disservice because you like those parts of yourself like bring out different creative. How do I explain it? It's like that is part of your personality and you
Hmm.
can create more if you're more open about like who you are and like not always trying to like hide things about yourself. So if you're Palestinian, if you're Lebanese or anything like that, like you shouldn't like have to be like trying to just like assimilate because then your work is boring. It doesn't like stand out or like maybe you like something corny and you're referencing something corny for like your work, but like there was a really cool shot in this movie you saw.
Yeah.
It just like like inspiration can come from like everywhere, I guess is That was like a very long-winded like answer.
That was the perfect answer though, because I think a lot of us, I think almost all of us have had to tone it down or felt like we had to tone down our identities at some point,
Yeah.
whether in college, high school, middle school. I mean, it's just like it's constant. So there's always been those moments where you feel like you need to tone it down. But yeah, you live your truest self and can be, the most creative and the most successful when you are more in tune and open about who you are and your identity.
Mhm.
Do you have any advice or tips you would share with other aspiring storytellers, directors, producers that want to kind of go into the line of work that you do?
Yeah, it's like there are actually like two pieces of advice that I hated hearing growing
Okay,
up.
let's hear it.
But the first is like show your work, which is most people have like a aversion to it. I remember I did. I'm like, I don't want to show my work. It's not good enough. It's not
Mm,
to the level of maybe my peers. But you just don't know who's looking at your page. Um, so many people want to be in this field, but they don't have any, they haven't done anything. And if you've done a film, if you have like really great photography, if you have really good writing, show that. Someone's going to be interested in it. Someone might be interested, they might point out something that you didn't notice in the work that you do. And it makes a huge difference. I know when I started like actually posting the things that I did, that's how I finally gained traction. And the second thing obviously is to network.
mm,
That used to give me like so much social anxiety, but I think there's like different ways to do it, and you just don't know who you're gonna meet. Like I came out here because my friend sent me, like I think like it was like 2 years ago, my friend sent me, this director was looking for people to shadow her in a commercial set. She was flying out to New York. So I like DM'd her, I showed her all my work. She's like, yeah, come by. So I shadowed her, and then I didn't even think I made that great of an impression. I was like fasting those days and like super tired. And then I came out here in like February, and I like just messaged her. I'm like, I'm in town. Like, do you want to like meet? And it was so great. We didn't talk about anything about like film. We just like talked about Palestine the whole time and like about my family and like getting to know like her life. And then she just like sent me a message out of the blue, like, oh, I know someone that's hiring for this thing. I heard like just send an email. And it was the show that I was working on. So I sent the email. He didn't respond. 2 weeks later, I just like sent it again and then got like a few interviews and then got the job. So you just don't know like this.
You don't
You
know.
don't
That's
know.
a very good lesson to teach people
Hmm.
because the work is not going to come to you. Like no one's just going to jump in your DMs like and be like, unless you're, I don't know, Steven Spielberg. Like no one's like, please like come work for me or come, come to this event or please come meet me. Like you really have to put yourself out there to some degree. I mean, and online, like through social media, through email, it's a little less jarring than in person, maybe going up to someone at a specific event and having to introduce yourself. So the risk is much lower.
Hmm.
So that's a perfect example of what you should be doing. And I think that kind of applies to other industries as well. Like go for it. Like shoot that shot. And just as you said, like you got no response with the other person
Yeah.
and you went for it again. Like there's no shame in that. That's what you do. That's how that's how
Yeah.
you get those jobs and get that work.
And you still want like I remember I used to have like social anxiety going to like some events or networking events, but something I love to do is photography. So and it always keeps me busy. Like photography is something that will like take me traveling to someplace I wouldn't travel because I didn't have someone to go with or because I have like an
Mm,
activity to do. So I might go to an event, bring my camera. Maybe I talk to two people there. It's not that fruitful, but I take pictures and I'll like tag like the organizers.
oh,
They'll
that's
like,
smart.
yeah, they're like, wow, these photos are nice. They'll
Yeah.
repost it. And then I'll have people then follow me from there and then I'll just like start
Yeah,
conversations.
that's really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you just have to do the work. You just have to do it.
yeah, like find the thing you're good at. If you're not good socially, find a way in. Like no one's going to hire to be a director because everyone wants to be a director. So
True.
find a way to get to that position. I remember I don't like editing, but everyone would hire me to be an editor. So I'm like, okay, let me think like let me get an assistant editor job. And then I know producers in like the editorial world end up directing. So like they'll produce and direct sometimes, like especially for like smaller brands. So I'm like my plan was assistant editor, editor, producer, director. I'm like, this sounds like weird. I don't know if it'll work. And then randomly it did work. So just find like that skill that like gets you in the door.
That's genius. And that's another lesson, like for people listening. You don't like editing, but
Hmm.
you kind of, it's great because you build that skill and
Yeah.
then you kind of, and it's a muscle, right? And then you kind of work on that muscle for producing and the muscle for directing and all of that factors in later on when you're able to apply it into your own projects that,
Hmm.
as you mentioned earlier, are probably more meaningful for you, especially now in your career.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that advice. I think it's important for our audience to hear that advice, and I really hope it encourages more people to really go for it, whatever it is that they want to do. Um, and this was inspiring. Like I'm really glad to hear all of this. I'm really glad that you were able to make it.
Yeah.
um, so where can people find you online? And not just find you, but if someone really wants to work with you, because you
Hmm.
guys really need to follow her on Instagram. What's your at?
It's at ghost dot to coast.
Where did that name come from?
I know it's such a strange name. I want.
Yeah.
It was actually this like song from this band called Fake Problems, but I just remember like I'm always like just traveling between the coast.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I came up with the name. I just wanted like Shahed was taken. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just do that. I've actually been wanting to change it to something like more generic, but then like
Mhm.
all my tags for my
No, Ghost
mentions
to
go.
Coast. There you
So
go.
yeah, they can find me on my Instagram or just search like my name. It'll come up. You'll see my work there. Like if you want to work or shadow, just DM me or like email me.
What if someone wanted to hire you to work on a series, a documentary, whatever it is, or maybe work on, collaborate on their brand?
Hmm.
Can they reach out to you on Instagram as well?
Yeah, Instagram or my emails on my website if you just like hit the contact form.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite movie, by the way, that just like if you had to think back to a favorite movie or film or TV show that you often can like rewatch over and over and over again, what is it?
I would say my favorite film is Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. It's actually interesting because like my favorite films I don't like to watch all the time because I
Yeah.
like to like keep it fresh, but I love that film. It's basically a film about it's like almost a coming of age story. It's told in a different way, but I just love how the director is able to show the way a child sees things, like the things you've how you viewed things in your childhood that maybe you forgot, like how big some things look like on a wall, the textures you would touch as you pass by, and like how your parents like emotions, whether it's like loving emotions or anger, how it's kind of amplified in a child. And for me, like that film is like perfect. Like just the way that he tells the story, the way that he makes you like feel things throughout. And I guess like all uh, like if people know Terrence Malick, just like the camera choices and the way he like decides, like his vision is like super inspiring. Yeah, that's probably my favorite film. But I did watch two Arabic films recently, which was Back to Alexandria, which I saw at the film festival. Highly recommend it. Such a good movie. It's funny and heartwarming. And then Bye Bye Tiberis.
Okay, I've heard of that. How was that
It
film?
was so good. It's Hayam Abbas's daughter was a
Hmm.
director and she like tells her mom's it's a documentary. She tells her mom's story, like growing up in Lebanon, her connection to Palestine. It's so well done, especially like for like a first like I think this might be her second or first film. I'm
Hmm.
not sure. It's really good. It's hard to find though. So I literally just like looking at film festivals that I can find it in and then happened to finally find it when it was here at like a small festival in Hollywood.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep an eye out for that. We're gonna keep an eye out for your projects that are coming out soon. Um, Follow Shahed Khaddash. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for
This
having
was a
me.
very informative and fun conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time, and we are well rooted. Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of Well Rooted. If you enjoyed today's episode and felt it brought you value, please subscribe, leave a comment, give us a like, and a review. This episode of Well Rooted has been brought to you by Girard & Associates CPAs. With locations across all of Los Angeles, Girard & Associates has been helping entrepreneurs and creatives make their dreams come true for over 2 decades. Go to girardcpa.com to learn more. This is Haneen, and we are all well rooted.